Good morning. Am I on? Is it coming across? There it is. I wasn't sure I heard it. Well, now. I printed a piece of paper out like just a minute ago. And now I can't find it. Be turning to Luke chapter 22. We're looking at these questions Jesus asked. Let me go just look real quick and see if I left it sitting in here. I have misplaced it. There it is. I printed out two of them, and I grabbed one and left the other. To back up just a little bit, to follow up, in Luke 17, really it's that context of 11 through 19 where Jesus heals the 10 lepers. That question, where are the 9? We had a couple of follow-up questions that I promised I would do some research on and get back to you. And one of the questions, I don't know that I have a definitive answer, as I suspected. Miss Tammy had asked about the Samaritan, would he have gone to present himself to a Samaritan priest, to a Jewish priest? I looked at R.C. Foster's Studies in the Life of Christ. I thought maybe I'd remembered something about that. He does mention that and says, kind of perhaps he dealt more with, I forget the commentator he mentioned, but some commentator had mentioned, that he kind of took the position, I don't know if he took the position, but sort of speculated that probably he had gone to the priest and come back. And as Foster points out, it doesn't seem that there's nearly enough time for that. But what priest would he have gone to? It's hard for me to imagine Jesus sending him to a Samaritan priest because they had this corrupted form of Judaism. They, for the most part, went by the Pentateuch, but they centered their worship around Mount Gerizim as opposed to Jerusalem.
Chad, as I was looking at that, I noticed that Jesus told him that he was clean.
Mm-hmm.
That's about as good as you can get.
Yeah, and
So
in
if he didn't just have to go to the priest, because Jesus is the high priest, and he just that was it.
and there may be some foresight, foreknowledge, and wisdom of God in that. He doesn't have to worry about that debate. And that kind of brings me to the other question that was asked. I think it was Robert that had asked about in verse 19 where Jesus says, "Arise, go thy way, thy faith hath made thee whole." And the question being, well, does that mean that the others, the 9 who were not grateful, were not healed? And again, Foster had some remarks on that. He didn't have a whole lot to say, but just kind of putting everything together, there's no indication that they were not healed. That Jesus, I'm going to revoke that healing, and that's in keeping with there are certain blessings that God confers upon us that He's not going to take back, even in spite of man's ingratitude in some cases. But it's let me find it. 14, verse 14. Really, this is where the answer is. It came to pass that as they went, they were cleansed. And the tense there of the verb in the Greek indicates a completed act. I believe it's aorist tense. But they were cleansed. So they were healed. What you see in verse 19 would seem to be a pronunciation to Tammy's point that she was making, of a spiritual cleansing. Again, I don't know if I can say that with 100% certainty, but just based on that tense, I don't think there's any question that all 10 were healed. But this man, this grateful Samaritan, received the additional blessing. And what is the most important blessing, cleansing, healing here in this passage? It's the one the grateful man received. You can have leprosy and die and still be clean spiritually and go to heaven. But if you're not clean spiritually, it doesn't matter if your leprosy is cleansed, because, yeah, that improves your life in the here and now, but what about eternity? So that seems to be the answer to that. Again, those two very good questions that are kind of difficult from that context, but I think the second question is a little easier to answer just based on that Greek verb tense in verse 14, and then putting that with verse 19, he's conferring an additional cleansing, a spiritual cleansing on him. And again, Jesus as God in the flesh, the Son of Man has power on earth to forgive sins. We noticed that already when we looked at the questions in Mark chapter 2, the cleansing of the paralytic. Now, to come back to where we left off last week, we'll pick up in Luke 22. Had several questions in this chapter. We didn't get time to cover all those. Let me mention before I get into this, I've got a few of these calendars that I do every year for our visitors. If somebody has visited VBS, if they've just visited our worship, if they contact through the Just a Minute, whether on social media or on the radio, I hang on to their addresses, and Joyce hangs on to those and does a fantastic job of keeping records of that, so that at the end of the year it's just easy for me to put those addresses in and send those out. But it's just something nice to do. I've said before, most people, when you get something in the mail, maybe it's from a business, it may even be from a church that somebody's visited, that it's not like, they're where they regularly attend or whatever. What tends to happen? What do we tend to do? We open it and we go, oh, okay, thanks. And what? File 13, right? So I was trying to think of something several years back that maybe people would not just immediately toss in the trash, and I found these on, I think it was on Vistaprint, where you can kind of personalize it. Yes, sir?
We got ours still on the refrigerator. You sent it to us at the beginning of last week.
Oh, okay, good. See, there you go. It worked. So, everybody could use a calendar, and it's helpful to, even if you say, well, I've already got a calendar for next year, where, one that you hang on the wall that you write your appointments on and stuff, but it's just something you can stick to the fridge. It's magnetic, and it's just a quick way to look. And I typically keep one if I have one left after I give them to the visitors and to anybody here that wants one. If I have one left, I'll a lot of times keep it in my office, because it's just, you can just at a glance see. I can look back several weeks before, several months before. Sometimes I need to do that. Say, what was that Sunday when what was the second Sunday of February? Well, I can just at a real quick glance look at it. So anyway, I've got a few of these here. I think I'll have more. I've got a few more addresses. I sent out 50 of these last week to visitors, but I've got a few more that I got to get to, contacts from Just a Minute, and I've got some folks that, trying to think, Sister Elise, I almost sent one to your daughter that's been sick, just to let her know we're thinking about her, and some others that I have an address for, relatives, acquaintances of people here that people have requested prayers for them. If I have an address, we'll send them one. So, but I think I've only got maybe 10, 15 left. But y'all remind me, I'll put some of these out front. Also, don't forget the nursing home service today is at 2 o'clock. Brother Blake texted me just a little while ago. He's been struggling, been sick this week. In fact, you may have noticed he hasn't been Wednesday or Sunday in a couple of different services now, but he is sick and was feeling better as recently as Friday evening. We were texting, and he texted me this morning and said he feels terrible. And so I will fill in for him. Told him we'll work him in on a different occasion, whether it's a Wednesday invitation or another 4th Sunday nursing home service or something like that. But I hate that. I hate that he's not feeling well, and I hate that we're not going to get to hear him do that. But anyways, remember that. We'll meet here at 1:30 for anybody that wants to go. I've kind of mentioned that for the young folks, but that's anybody. If you want to go and help out with that, I would love to have you come along with us. Okay, so Luke 22, where we left off, we covered it kind of quickly. I just want to mention Luke 22, 35, right? I got a mark on my paper here. I can't quite see the verse. Yes, where Jesus says, when I sent you without purse and scrip and shoes, lacked you anything? And they said nothing. We basically covered that. He's just pointing out that things are going to be different now. They're going to be without Jesus directly with them. And Papaw had a note in his notes here that in the New King James, there's a heading before verse 35 that reads, supplies for the road. I kind of like that. But we basically covered that one. I just want to mention that as where we left off. Next question in this chapter, as I said, there are a few in this chapter, would be in verse 48, where Jesus says to Judas, betrayest thou the Son of Man with a kiss? And so the context here is Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. The previous questions there, they're in the upper room, and this is right as they're heading out to, right before they're heading out to Gethsemane. Here in verse 48, they are in the garden. Jesus has prayed. He's been praying. You see that in the previous verses, 39 through 46. And then verse 47 says, while he yet spake, he comes to the disciples. He finds them sleeping for sorrow, verse 45 tells us. And he asks them, why sleep ye? Rise and pray, lest you enter into temptation. Of course, some of these questions we covered when we went through Matthew and Mark. But while he was yet speaking, this multitude, and he that was called Judas, one of the 12, went before them and drew near unto Jesus to kiss him. And that's when Jesus asks this question. He's asking the question, of course, to Judas, but he's asking it openly, and so in one sense, this is for others' benefit as well. Now, it was about a year before this that Jesus had mentioned to his disciples, to his apostles particularly, have not I chosen you 12, and one of you is a demon. King James says devil, but the idea there, demon. There's only one devil in the sense of Satan, but that's in John 6, verse 70. Satan had entered into Judas' heart. We're told that, in fact, this same chapter, Luke 22, 3. Then entered Satan into Judas, surnamed Iscariot, being of the number of the 12. Went his way, communed with the chief priests and captains, how he might betray him unto them. They were glad and covenanted to give him money. So Judas, Satan has entered into his heart, is the way the wording is there. Of course, this is not something that can be done against anyone's will, but he had allowed Satan into his heart in that sense. And it's interesting, by the way, this will be asked. It's not a question Jesus asked, but Peter will ask someone later on, after Jesus has ascended back into heaven, the church has begun, first day of Pentecost following that. Jesus is going to ask someone, why has Satan filled your heart? Who do you ask that question to? I'll give you hints in Acts chapter 5. Does that help? Ananias, in the context there of Ananias and Sapphira. In fact, I believe particularly there, let me double check. I think he's asking in that, it's Acts 5, verse 3. Yeah, Ananias, why has Satan filled thine heart to lie to the Holy Spirit to keep back part of the price of the lamb? Of course, later on, his wife will come in. He'll ask her about it as well. But particularly to Ananias, he says, why has Satan filled your heart? So it's a, I guess we'd say a metaphor for following the leading of the devil as opposed to following the leading of God. But of course, Judas has made this deal with the Jewish leaders. He basically, to sort of paraphrase it, he says to them, hey, look, I know what you want. You want to take him. They've figured out, Judas no doubt has figured out, one thing he will not do. He's obviously got power. He's healed people. He's cast out demons. He's raised people from the dead. It's obvious there is nothing he cannot do. I mean, he has shown power over the weather, over sickness, over men's thoughts, even reading their thoughts. He's shown power over the spirit realm and casting out demons. He has shown power over death itself, raising people from the dead. There's nothing he cannot do. But it's also become obvious, even to his enemies, he will not use that power for what purpose? To save himself. And so they say, all right, well, let's take him. But why do they put that off? They fear the people. In fact, Matthew particularly records in Matthew 26, they say, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar. So Judas goes to him, and Judas says, I know you're trying to get him away from the people so you can do this thing sort of, on the sly. I can give you Jesus away from the multitudes. It seemed like everywhere he went, there were multitudes following him. He says, I can get you a time when he'll be just him, maybe a few of his apostles. Of course, that interested them, and so that's what they covenanted with him for. Somebody, if you would, grab Psalm 41, verse 9. You'll see this betrayal prophesied. In Mark 9, 31, and also 10:33, Jesus had himself prophesied this betrayal, but it was prophesied even back in the Psalms. And, if somebody should ask why a kiss? Why does it say that he betrayed him with a kiss? Well, that was Mark's account, Mark 14, 43 through 45, says that's what Judas gave them as a sign. This will be the one. It's kind of a sign, not so much that they needed help identifying Jesus, but it's kind of like, sometimes people will say, when I give this signal, when I say go, that's the right time. When I wink with the eye or whatever, that's the time. Well, his signal was giving Jesus that kiss, be like a kiss on the cheek, a kiss of greeting in their culture. Who's got Psalm 41:9? Okay.
Ye mine own familiar friend, in whom I trusted, which did eat of my bread, hath lifted up his heel against me.
Mine own familiar friend, I trusted, ate of my bread. We ate together, and when it says ate of my bread, literally, Jesus being God in the flesh, he owns it all. And so, I gave him this bread. I created this bread, and we ate together, fellowship. And most of us, I dare say all of us, have experienced someone that we were good friends with, trusted, had fellowship together, that they betrayed us. And it may have been something that was kind of a one-time thing and then peace was made, or it may have been something that totally destroyed that relationship and remains such even to the present. But that betrayal was prophesied all the way back there in Psalm 41, verse 9. And I think that kind of brings us to a point that even though Jesus, he of course knew the prophecy, Jesus is the Word, so he wrote the prophecy in that sense. He knew it in advance. He knew this was going to happen. He had already, mentioned John 6:70 about a year earlier. He had prophesied it, predicted it. He mentioned it in Mark 9:31, Mark 10:33, other places. He's talked about this. He's hinted at it. He's alluded to it. But do you think that made it any less hurtful, painful, that someone in whom he had invested so much time, spending time with him, fellowship with him, teaching him, Judas received a great deal of teaching like the other apostles. It didn't take away the pain. It didn't take away the personal sting and the hurt of this betrayal. And so he asks there, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? That's how the New King James puts it. Betrayest thou the Son of Man with a kiss in the King James. What is that? I think we're getting condensation. I just heard something hit the tray there. I wanted to look and see how it was worded in the ESV. I got to catch up here. Oops, I went too far. What are we at? 23. $38, right? Oh, I knew I was like, that's not right. I was in the wrong chapter. 22:38. I was thinking it was slightly different. 22:48. I'll get it. Yeah, ESV has Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss? And I was going to read to you just a little bit here. I've told y'all before, R.C. Foster's Studies in the Life of Christ is this big, massive book, but it's the only, commentaries and scholarly type works like that. When you're studying a passage, a lot of times they're very helpful and valuable, and sometimes they get really in depth, and it can get just, sometimes almost, as I say, just about makes your brain hurt sometimes. But Foster's book is probably the only book like that I have ever read, and I would describe it as just literally a page turner. I had to read that for a class I took several years ago. We would have these long sections of reading that we had to do for each class session. And I remember when I got that book in the mail, I was just like, are you kidding me? And we're going to read through this whole thing? What is this guy thinking? But I frequently found myself reading way beyond what was assigned for each class because I couldn't put it down. He has such a way of writing and putting things. But in Foster's book, this is the section he divides by periods of Jesus' life, and this section is called the final week. That's another thing I like about that book. It's kind of a harmony of the gospel accounts. But in this section called the final week, commenting on this particular passage in Luke 23, this is from very end of page 1236. When the manner of betrayal is contemplated, all efforts to cover up the degradation of Judas and clothe him in motives more or less respectable fail. Judas accepted leadership in laying out the procedure and in fulfilling it. His words, "Hail, Master," and the traitorous kiss are the climax of baseness. The Greek verb is compounded and means to kiss effusively or in a most demonstrative manner. And so this was kind of a really over-the-top thing. It's not like he just came up and, it was just sort of, "Hail, Master," and you can just see a big embrace, and he kisses him on the cheek, and as if they were just best of friends. And they were, or so one would suppose. And yet here he is betraying him. It is thus, Foster goes on to say, it is thus that great love and the joy of meeting again after having endured a prolonged agony of parting would be expressed. In other words, that's how you would express seeing somebody you haven't seen for a long time. "Oh, it's so good to see you." And of course, we often do that. Big hug, you hadn't seen somebody in a while. He continues, Judas came forward boldly and was presumably in the place of greatest danger if Jesus chose to use his power to defend himself. Judas was convinced that Jesus would not resist arrest. Jesus, of course, had this very night conferred upon his apostles the title friends, but he had at that meeting in the upper room made it clear that Judas was not included now in that circle of his friends. Why then did he call Judas friend while he was in the very act of treachery? Now, in Luke's account, we don't see that, but that's in, find the exact reference, it's in Matthew where he says that. Yeah, friend, wherefore art thou come? Matthew 26:50. And so Matthew records him addressing Jesus as friend. And so, records him addressing Judas as friend. Jesus did so. So Foster asks, why then did he call Judas friend while he was in the very act of treachery? And this is interesting to me. The Greek words are different in the two passages. Comrade or companion is a better translation of the word used there by Matthew. Gibson thinks that Jesus uses the term in a last appeal to turn Judas from his wicked course. It's hard to believe that this is the meaning, Foster says. It seems rather to be used to show Judas that he is recognized and to remind him of his absolute baseness in betraying the one who had been his comrade. It is rebuke rather than an appeal, but does not seem to be either an expression of sarcasm or anger. He says the Authorized Version, King James Version, translates it, friend, wherefore art thou come? While the American Standard Version says, friend, do that for which thou art come. So in the American Standard, it's a statement as opposed to a question. The verb must be supplied. There are no punctuation marks in the uncial manuscripts. The broken sentence is full of pathos. It may be filled in as follows. He gives a couple of options here. Number one, friend, this is that for which thou art come. In other words, I know your treachery. Or, number two, friend, do that for which thou art come. That's how the American Standard records it, of course. 3, friend, is it this for which thou art come? Or number 4, friend, is this, a kiss in other words, fitting for that for which thou art come? I think that one makes a lot of sense. This last interpretation would make the statement practically the same as given in Luke 22:48, but it is more likely the latter was added immediately after Judas had kissed him. But regardless, Jesus asked this question, again, not for information, but he's trying to get something across to Judas. Judas, this is why you've come. You're betraying your friend and one of your closest companions who has only ever been good to you, and you come and betray me with a kiss. And, you know, we often say deity never asks a question for information. We're going to see that in our morning sermon this morning. God asking a question of Adam, where are you? It's not that God is playing hide and seek and, well, I wonder where he is. I don't see him. That question was for Adam's benefit. Adam needed to see where he was. And so this question here seems perhaps for others in the garden for their benefit as well, but it would seem none more so than for Judas. Judas, you need to see what you're doing. What you're doing is the ultimate betrayal. All right, anything else on that one? Now let's go into Luke 23. I keep going into 23 when I'm looking for verses. Now we're in 23. Our next question we'll look at is in Luke chapter 23, and particularly verse 31. Now, as we just noticed, Judas has betrayed Jesus. Luke records Jesus' denial by Peter. Peter denying 3 times Jesus, that he even knows who he is. You have a trial by the Jewish council, and then when you open up chapter 23, Pilate questions Jesus. Then Jesus goes before Herod. That begins at verse 5. And then you have the crowd rejecting Jesus. They're crying out, crucify him, crucify him, verse 21 of chapter 23. And then Jesus is led away to be crucified. And this section, Jesus being led away to be crucified, that is where our question is found, our next question at least. course, Pilate has, he wants to release Jesus. He's willing to release Jesus, verse 20 tells us, but the people are crying out, crucify him. He says, what evil has he done? I found no cause of death in him. I'll chastise him and let him go. But they're crying out. They've got the people stirred up now. We sometimes talk about mob mentality. That's kind of what's going on here. They were instant with loud voices, 23 says, requiring that he might be crucified. The words of them and of the chief priests prevailed. Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they required. He released unto them him that for sedition and murder was cast into prison, whom they had desired, but he delivered Jesus to their will. Now, then it goes on to this next section. As they led him away, they laid hold upon one Simon, a Cyrenian, coming out of the country, and on him they laid the cross that he might bear it after Jesus. We've talked before a lot of archaeological discoveries and things like that with crucifixion, especially because in this area, wood was pretty scarce. There's not nearly as much wood as there is stone. So probably this area, this location they're going to lead Jesus to just outside the city, Golgotha, place of a skull, Calvary, it probably has an upright pole there, whether wood or some other substance. Wood would make the most sense there, but being left and used over and over again. And a lot of times when it would talk about somebody carrying their cross, it would be the idea of you're carrying that cross beam that will be fastened, and then the hands stretched out and attached to that, and then the feet being to the other bottom part. So they've got Jesus, and then they compel Simon, a Cyrenian. Seems that because of the scourging, Jesus would need some help here. They're certainly not going to carry it for him, and so they compel. Jesus alludes to this, by the way, in Matthew chapter 5 when he says, if somebody compels you to go a mile, go with him an extra, that's where we get our expression, go in the extra mile. A Roman could compel someone under Roman rule, such as a Jew. Hey, you've got to carry this, but by law you had to go a mile. And after that, you could be free from that obligation. Jesus says, go that extra mile and show the goodness of God through you. But here they take Simon and they compel him to bear this cross for Jesus. There followed him a great company of people, verse 27, and of women, which also bewailed and lamented him. Would seem to be those who had been followers of Jesus, disciples, these women. There were others as well, but it particularly mentions of women. And so Jesus, turning unto them, said, Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming in the which they shall say, Blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bare and the paps which never gave suck. Then shall they begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. And here's our question, for if they do these things in a green tree, what shall be done in the dry? So he's speaking to those women that were there, and again, it mentions specifically the women, but there are others as well. It would seem that he's speaking probably to all of them, but it does kind of go out of its way, that text, to mention the women. They're mourning, they're lamenting, and he says, don't weep for me, weep for yourselves. And so the question then becomes, why say that? Why would he say, don't weep for me, weep for yourselves? Anybody have a thought on that? Yeah, it seems a pretty clear reference to AD 70 and the destruction of Jerusalem. This is kind of the final act of rebellion, rejection by the Jewish nation. And again, going back to Matthew's account, when Pilate is, now, it's not like Pilate was this good guy that, oh, poor Jesus, I want to be his follower, he's innocent. I don't want to mistake, it's not like Pilate was this deeply spiritual man, he's trying to release Jesus, but these mean people just won't let him. Pilate certainly was no, faithful follower of Jesus. However, he does see here, as the governor, prefect, Jesus has done no wrong. And he's seeking to release him. But the people are crying out. They're stirred up by the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. And they're crying out, crucify him. And they even go so far as to say what? His blood be upon us and upon our children. Man, what a statement to make. And again, if that seems almost incredulous, then you find a situation, you can even just look in history and see just how worked up people will get in a mob situation like that, and some of the crazy things they will do and say. But they go so far as to say, his blood be upon us and upon our children. And these are no doubt probably some of the same ones who, as he came into Jerusalem, were crying, Hosanna to the King. Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. Now, some of them may not have been. There may have been some of those in that crowd that they're off to the side and going, I can't believe this. This is the King. This is the Messiah. But no doubt, I don't think there's any question. Probably some, at least, of those people have been worked into such a frenzy. And they say that. But Jesus' reference here seems clear, at least connected to the destruction of Jerusalem. This final act of rejection, rebellion, defiance in rejecting God's Son is going to ultimately lead to the end of the Jewish nation and economy when Titus and the Roman forces come in AD 70 and just utterly destroy Jerusalem. And so he says, of course, Jesus knows. He knows exactly what he's doing as he goes to the cross. He knows he's going to die, not because they're going to take his life, but because he's going to lay it down, as he'd already said before. But he also knows he's going to rise again the third day. He's going to ascend into heaven. He's going to receive a kingdom that will never be destroyed. He's going to sit at the right hand of the Father on high. And so he says, don't weep for me. Weep for yourselves. And for those close to you, that you be spared from these things, because some bad things are coming. But he asked that question there in verse, I just lost my place again. What did I say, 31? Yeah, for if they do these things in a green tree, what shall be done in the dry? And that was another one I wanted to look at in the ESV. For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry? Just to give you a little bit insight on that, this is from J.W. McGarvey in his book, The Fourfold Gospel, which is also a harmonization of the gospel accounts. He says, the green wood or tree and dry wood, quote, the language here is obscurely proverbial. Here, as elsewhere, Luke 19:43, Matthew 24:15, Jesus refers to the sorrows which the Romans were to bring upon the Jews. And one, the meaning may be, if the fiery persecution of Rome is so consuming that my innocence, though again and again pronounced by the governor himself, is no protection against it, what will that fire do when it envelops the dry, guilty, rebellious city of Jerusalem? That's pretty powerful. Or, two, we may make the present and the future grief of the women the point of comparison and interpret thus. If they cause such sorrow to the women while the city is like a green tree, how much more when like a dry, dead tree, it is about to fall. So it's not the easiest thing to understand, but it does seem to be something kind of, we might say something similar to, this ain't nothing. You ain't seen nothing yet. You think this is something to weep about now? He's not saying it's not, but he's saying, hey, it's going to be worse. And I was looking I just ran across it like literally about 5 minutes before class in Foster and was going to mention it. Foster says he does not weep now as he did at the triumphal entry. You remember when Jesus approached Jerusalem in Luke, I believe it's 21, he wept over the city. The time for weeping is past. Doom portends, for the nation has rejected God's Son and is slaying him. The times of distress will be so great that mothers will have double distress in witnessing the cruel butchery of their children by the Romans, as well as in meeting the same fate themselves. The enigmatic saying about the green tree and the dry is one of those hard sayings in which the teaching of Jesus abounds. It would stick in the memory and tantalize the hearer to prolonged meditation as to the meaning. And he gives this quote kind of as a paraphrase of it. If they, the Romans, do these things, torture and crucifixion, in the green tree, Jesus, he's saying that green tree is a reference to Jesus, hard to burn, for no fault was found in him. What shall be done in the dry? The Jewish nation, godless and rebellious, and thus easy to burn. Most of us have experienced the difference in trying to burn green wood versus dry. Big difference as far as how it burns and how easily it will do so. So a difficult saying there, difficult text as far as in that question, but seems to be an indication. I think there's something to what McGarvey says as far as it being, if this fiery persecution is so consuming that even Jesus' innocence pronounced by the governor himself is no protection against it, what will that fire do when it envelops the dry, guilty, rebellious city of Jerusalem? And that's kind of like Foster's second point. But I think there's also something, if this causes such sorrow to women while the city is like a green tree, how much more when like a dead tree, dry, dead tree, it's about to fall. So interesting question there from Jesus. Anything else on any of these? I just realized our next question is in 24. I was thinking I had another one in 23. But our next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions all come from the same context, so I'm really reluctant to start that. These questions are going to come from chapter 24 of Luke, and they will be in the conversation he's going to have with two men as they walk that road to Emmaus. And even the, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, even the sixth question is from chapter 24, just after that context, just after he's disappeared from their midst. He's going to ask a question of the other disciples. So I don't really want to get into that anyways. That's the second bell though, right? Look at that. Right on time. Somebody mark it down. All right, God willing, we will pick up in Luke 24:17 with our next question next Sunday. Thank y'all very much.